And this story really covers all of the concepts, all of the ideas in which we believe. When I met Bernie, we had a little discussion about what he was doing in Kansas City, and he said, I came down to hear the session, and I said, yeah, but it costs a lot of money to come this far. He laughed. He said, well, Zig, thanks to my son David, I don't have to worry about money. I said, Bernie, that sounds like a story. Why don't you tell me? He said, I'll be glad to. This is the story. He said, Zig, when our son David was born, but he said it wasn't long before we noticed that something was wrong with David. His little head hung too limply to the right side of his body for it to be a normal situation, and he drooled too much. So we took him to a specialist. And the specialist, after a very thorough examination, told us that he had the reverse of club's feet. And he said we treated him for that for several weeks. And then it dawned on us that this wasn't it. It was more serious than that. So we found who the top specialist was in all of Canada, and we went to him. And this specialist, after a very thorough examination, said to us that David is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He's never going to be able to walk or talk or count to 10. I could not buy the idea that my son was going to grow up and be a vegetable. All that doctor had really convinced me to do was to go find a doctor who was not problem conscious and look for one who was solution conscious. So we went to other doctors. He said, as a matter of fact, we went to 30 different doctors, and all 30 of them in essence said the same thing, and that is that there is no hope for this little boy. And then they heard of a Dr. Pearlstein down in Chicago, reputedly the foremost authority in the world. But he was so good that he was booked for 2 solid years in advance. Now that didn't particularly bother Bernie, because hope for the first time had reared its elusive head. And Bernie just figured that somehow or another he was going to get his son in front of Dr. Pearlstein. Well, he found out that Dr. Pearlstein was a bridge player, found out his home number, found out that he played every Friday night with his son. He called him there, and they made a deal. When the examination was all over, he said to Bernie, this boy is a spastic. He has cerebral palsy. He will never be able to walk or to talk or count to 10 if you listen to the prophets of doom. But he said, I want you to know that I am not problem conscious. I want you to know that I am solution conscious. And I fervently believe there is something which can be done for David if you are willing to do your part. Well, rather obviously the Leipzig said, Doctor, what is it you want us to do? Spell it out. Dr. Pearlstein and his nurses spelled it out in minute detail. He said, first of all, you're going to have to work this little boy beyond all human endurance. Then you're going to have to work him some more. You're going to have to push him until he literally falls. And then you are going to have to push him some more. You've got to understand now that once you start this process, that there is no backing up or slowing down or staying away from it. This is a lifetime process, because if you ever discontinue this, then he will revert back to where he was before. One last thing. Don't let him see any other victims of cerebral palsy taking therapy. Because if he watches them take therapy, he will pick up the awkward, inadvertent movements they make, and subconsciously he will make them a part of his own movements. You see, folks, motivation without instruction and education is ultimately frustrating. For me to tell you can do something and not to tell you how is a cruel hoax that we have studiously avoided throughout. Every time we've said you can do it, we've always said, here's the way to do it. Well, they went back to Winnipeg and they went to work with David. They built a little gymnasium down in the basement of their home. They hired a physical therapist and a bodybuilder, and they went to work. It took them a lot of months, but finally one day David Leipzig could move the length of his own body. It took him several years, but then one day Bernie got a call from the therapist. He said, come on home, I believe David is ready. And he rushed home, and David was down in the gymnasium on a mat, and as he was attempting to do a push-up, and as that little body started to rise into the air, The physical and emotional exertion was so great, there wasn't a dry inch of skin on that little body. And the mat appeared as if somebody had sprinkled it with water. When that one perfect push-up was completed, David and Bernie and Elaine and the therapist and the bodybuilder and the two sisters and the neighbors all broke down and shed those tears, which clearly say that happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is victory. He has no sense of balance. He will never be able to swim or to skate or to ride a bicycle. He just simply will be different. It'll probably take him 2 years even to learn how to float. On October the 23rd, 1971, my wife and I flew to Winnipeg, Canada to attend the bar mitzvah of, quote, little David Lofchick. I wish the movie cameras of the world had been there to have witnessed what we saw. And I had watched David as he grew and as he made all of that progress. But this particular day, as this boy walked tall and straight and strong to the front of the synagogue, that he had already done as many as 1,100 push-ups in a single day, that he had run 6 miles nonstop, that he was shooting golf in the high 80s, that he was one of the best table tennis players in all of Winnipeg, Canada, that he was skating on the neighborhood hockey team, that he was running the wheels off his 4th bicycle. Oh, I tell the story about David in a lot of the details because, you see, I happen to believe that this story literally covers all of the areas that we cover in Born to Win. You see, to begin with, they dealt with David on a very honest basis. They never said it's going to be easy. The parents were never told it's going to be easy. They were told that you've got to stay with it, but if you'll suck it up and tough it out and stay with it, the results are going to be dramatic.